Hello and welcome on behalf of the Goodman Theater. Welcome to all our viewers. My name is Lisa Portes and I head the MFA directing program at the theater school at DePaul University. And I'm honored to be here to talk about remixing Miller. First, I'd like to introduce our playwrights. We're just going to get right to it. Playwright Kimberly Belflower, author of John Proctor is the Villain. Kimberly Belflower is a playwright and educator originally from a small town in Appalachia, Georgia. Her play Lost Girl won the 2018 Kennedy Center Darrell Ayers National Playwriting Award, and her other plays include Gondal, Teen Girl Fantasies, and The Sky Game, and her plays have been commissioned, produced, and developed by the Ohio Playwrights Conference, South Coast Rep, Milwaukee Rep, the Farm Theater, We the Women Collective, as well as many colleges and universities across the country. She's currently a playwriting fellow at Emory University and holds an MFA from the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome, Kimberly.
Hi, thank you.
And next I'd like to bring up Eleanor Burgess, author of Wife of a Salesman. Eleanor's work has been produced at Manhattan Theater Club, McCarter Theater Center, Geffen Playhouse, the Huntington, Alliance Theater, Writers Theater, Finborough Theater, Milwaukee Rep, Jiva Theater. I mean, there's a lot of theaters. Let's just say a lot of theaters across the country. It has been developed with leading new play centers across the country, including the New Group, New York Theater Workshop, and the Lark. Her hit, The Niceties, has played around the country and just completed an off-Broadway run. She's been a staff writer for Perry Mason on HBO and studied history at Yale and dramatic writing at NYU Tisch. Welcome, Eleanor.
Hey, it's awesome to be here.
It's great to see you both. I'm going to talk a little bit about our dear friend, the granddaddy of us all, Arthur Miller. For those of you watching, I mean, we know if you're watching this, you're already a Miller fan, but just bear with me. We know that while I go through a kind of brief bio, clearly Miller is a seminal American playwright whose major works include All of My Sons, which won the Tony for Best Play in 1947 and was his first big hit, Death of a Salesman in 1948, which won the Tony Award for Best Author and the Pulitzer Prize in Drama. And then in 1953, Miller wrote The Crucible, which won him another Tony. And in 1955, he wrote A View from the Bridge, which did not win actually any Tony Awards at the time, but its 1983, 1998, and 2010 productions reaped many. For those of you watching who saw the gorgeous production of Ivo van Hove's View from the Bridge here at Goodman in 2017, you'll know why. So while Miller was lauded for his major works, he and they also came under criticism, specifically within the context of second wave feminism. He came under frequent criticism for stereotypical representations of women and the misogyny, perceived misogyny expressed in his work. Such critics maintain that women in Miller's plays are either the all-giving wives and mothers, or young sexualized temptresses, or self-serving whores, and that his female characters are limited to their physicality, and that finally, they generally only serve the male protagonist's needs. As early as 1967, Aaron Mottram pointed out that Arthur Miller's plays were written for and largely from the point of view of a man, and implies that Miller's women are unimportant and passive. And in 1990, critic Anna Massa writes that it's surprising that Miller's plays reduce half of the human race, women, to such subordinate roles. Interestingly, Miller was married 3.5 times, and all of the women with whom he was involved were strong and impressive. His first wife, Mary Slattery, went on to become a psychologist. His second wife, as we all know, was the movie star Marilyn Monroe, formidable. His third wife, Inge Morath, was a photographer. And at the end of his life, he became engaged to the painter Agnes Barley. And while he has absolutely come under criticism for his depiction of women, feminist proponents point out that Miller's social critique criticizes the social conditions and cultural values that ultimately lead to the oppression of women. So it's within that kind of large context of Miller and the feminist critique of Miller that we enter into today's discussion. We have a real treat for you all. I'm going to talk a little bit about Death of a Salesman, and then you're going to get to see an excerpt of Wife of a Salesman by Eleanor Burgess. And then we're going to give a brief summary of The Crucible, and then we're going to get to see what Kimberly was up to with John Proctor is the Villain. So Death of a Salesman, perhaps the most quintessential American drama, tells the story of Willy Loman, a salesman, who falls victim to the lie of the American dream. Linda Lohman, his wife. Oh, before I go on, if you haven't seen the free streaming Goodman, Tony Award-winning Goodman production of Death of a Salesman, it's streaming through the end of this weekend. You must see it. It's stunning. And now back to my summary. The play also, in the play, we also are introduced to Linda Lohman, Willy's wife, who tries everything she's got to save him. In a flashback, we also meet his mistress, the discovery of which destroys Willy's son, Biff. So that's some setup here. Now, in Eleanor's production, her play, Wife of a Salesman, picks up Miller's two female characters and imagines what would happen if a Linda-like figure, the wife, were to drive up from Brooklyn to Boston to confront the mistress. Now we'll bring up our cast. We have Catherine Kaberlein playing wife, Emily Marceau playing mistress, Gregory Linnington playing Jim, and Ashley Crow playing Angela. And with that, we will move to an excerpt, a little amuse-bouche of Wife of a Salesman.
It doesn't seem like you want to be married. I mean, do you even want him? Are you even sure you want him?
I feel as if I may have been harping on some of the negative aspects of marriage. What he and I have is solid. It's special. I sometimes think if only he could stay home more. But then we've got those payments, the mortgage, and the maybe we should have bought less. But what? Were we supposed to not have a refrigerator? Were the kids supposed to go to school with holes in their shoes? It's amazing how the bills add up. But even with all the travel and the women in Pittsburgh or Boston, there's things I don't know if I could live without. You know the way he puts his hands on his lips when he's thinking.
Yeah.
I don't know why all men don't do that. Makes you think about their lips. And he has all these jokes. You can say, tell me a joke about anything, about blizzards or giraffes, and he's got one.
Well, yeah, he's a salesman.
He calls me a queen.
He treats you like a maid. If you two don't make each other happy anymore.
Jim emerges out of the back of the audience and comes striding down the alley.
Hey, ladies. Sorry. I mean, not ladies, just we're going to take 10. It's not you two. You two are doing awesome. It's just the lighting looks like we're in a film noir and one of you is about to get murdered.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah, obviously, we want it to be expressionisty, just not that expressionisty. So we're going to we're gonna fix that.
He turns to go back into the audience.
Oh, hey Jim, just quickly, how is that in terms of with the is she capable of playing me? The can I trust you?
Yeah, no, I felt it. There was this great alchemical, this dawning respect. This what if she's not my rival? What if she's my confidant? What if she's my savior? It's very fun to watch. You know how women are always taught to see each other as the competition.
Well, yeah.
Oh, it's great. Every time we reverse that.
Great.
Yeah. Good stuff. Angela, yeah, can we go back?
Absolutely, Jim.
He wanders off into the audience to talk to the lighting designer. Heather fishes her phone out from between the cushions of the couch.
Oh, contraband in the couch.
No, honestly, I thought we were going to stop so many times. Abby has strep, so
Oh, right. Oh my gosh, poor Abby. Is she doing okay?
Yes, she's fine. I just wanted to, if Casey needs anything, you can never find the Tylenol in the medicine cabinet. So.
Of course. Yeah, of course. Shoot. Oh my God, I sound like I'm actually from the 50s. Well, shoot. Do you know if these are the new stockings?
I don't remember.
Weren't they going to get us a new brand or something? And it wasn't going to get runs? Well, that sounds like stocking diarrhea. Is Holly here? Jim, I'm getting a run in these stockings. Whenever people are like, don't worry about global warming. We'll fix it with science. I'm like, we still don't have no run stockings. Science isn't that great. God, stockings are so stupid. I hate them.
Oh, I hate the word pantyhose. Those words act on me viscerally, like the way some people handle the word moist. I can't handle pantyhose. Pantyhose. I'm sure it has something to do with my mother.
You said they do a nice opening, right?
Oh, it's nice. Yeah. Oh, but be careful about your emails the morning after. If you don't read reviews, be really careful. They include highlights in the company email.
Oh, weird. That's good to know.
Or I don't know. Maybe they've changed it by now. Yeah, one of the guys in the last thing I did here got really mad because he's very vigilant about not reading them.
Yeah. I mean, I never read them.
Oh, you're good. I always. I mean, I know I shouldn't. I'm always somehow convinced they're going to have something to teach me.
Not me, no. Like, I mean, for this one, I'll feel lucky if there isn't like a, but why is there an Asian woman in the play? That's not historically accurate.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense with the time period. But there's not enough Willy in this play. I just want to know what this all says about Willy or Arthur.
What about the sons?
Talk about the men. Talk about the men, damn it. I have a PhD in Arthur Miller, and what the author really doesn't understand about him is that.
Oh, God. I mean, you know, I disagree with Eleanor about this. You know, I like Linda as a character, but
why can't it be more like the good old plays written by men?
I guess I'm mostly worried that it will make me really sad. Because if someone doesn't like the characters, I'll just end up worrying about, like, is that because people just don't like women? I feel like a lot is said about misogyny and about people hating women, and I feel like not enough is said about people just not liking women, not rooting for them.
Look, that's big. I mean, that's a big sentence.
Right? Like, sure, really sexy women, or really smart women, or really badass women, sure, but like, just women, average Jane.
Violet, can you stand by the radio?
Oh, sure. Oh, hey, Jim.
Yeah.
Is Eleanor here today?
No, she's not coming back till after first preview. She doesn't do dress rehearsals. They says they make her panic and she hates her. It makes her hate herself.
Fair enough. Do you know if she found a place to insert that speech?
Which speech?
The one about the mistress's grandmother?
Uh,
My grandmother died in childbirth when she was 24, and I've always had dreams about her, even though I've only ever seen her picture. And in those dreams, she's a lot like me. She's classy, she's fun, she'd understand me in a way my mother can't.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
no. We don't have a place for that.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, I mean, it's just, I'm not sure we need it.
Hey, Jim, we're ready if you want to take a look at the...
Yes, great.
He heads back into the audience.
Damn. Really liked that speech.
Yeah, she got one of my good ones too.
No, but I think that it's important. Like this reminder, this, I've been thinking about my grandmother and like, what would she have wanted to be? And then I think about all the billions and billions of women and like the books we'll never get to read. And like, would we be living on Mars by now if all the women who could have been good at math and science had actually been able to like, and just the dreams that never even got dreamed. And I just can't. Yeah. I mean, at least when men die in war, we build them a monument. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm being crazy.
And scene. Amazing. Thank you. Oh, am I up? I'm sorry, I'm blocked on my own screen here. Great. Oh, I'm back. I got zapped out and then zapped in again. It's crazy. Fantastic work, right? Hey. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Crucible. then we're going to hear about John Proctor, and then we're going to see another little scenelet, and then we're going to take it away. So in the Crucible, Arthur Miller uses the Salem witch trials of the late 1600s as a metaphor for the McCarthy trials of the 1950s, which accused American citizens, military personnel, government figures, and artists of communism. In the Crucible, we meet the upstanding John Proctor, who is brought down by a 17-year-old self-accused witch, Abigail Williams, with whom he had engaged in an affair. I'm just going to leave it at that on the Crucible. Now let's think about John Proctor as the villain. Set in a high school classroom in Georgia, the class, under the instruction of the beloved English and sex education teacher, Mr. Smith, explores the Crucible. One of the students, Shelby Holcomb, returns after having been sent away under mysterious circumstances, and eventually, over the course of the play, makes apparent that she and Mr. Smith have had an affair that led to her exile. Scandal ensues, and in this scene, the last scene of the play, Shelby and her best friend Ray Lynn perform their rendition of The Crucible. Let's welcome back Emily Marceau playing Shelby and Ashley Crow playing Ray Lynn.
Welcome, welcome everybody. As soon as we've taken our seats, we'll just dive right in. Oh my
Shelby
goodness.
and Ray Lynn come in wearing full out 1600s attire.
You two look amazing. Why don't you go ahead and get right up there in the front?
They stand at the front of the classroom and get ready to go.
All right, everybody settle down. Whenever you're ready, ladies.
We'd like to start with an outside reading.
From Spark Notes. Honest, upright, and blunt spoken, John Proctor is a good man, but one with a secret fatal flaw.
Proctor is, above all, a proud man who places great emphasis on his reputation.
He finally bursts out with a confession, calling Abigail a whore.
He goes to the gallows redeemed for his earlier sins.
A good man.
A proud man.
Whore.
But he's such a good man.
He's a very proud man.
Think about his reputation.
Whore. Hello, Abigail Williams.
Hello, Elizabeth Proctor. Well, now that we've got the stiff pleasantries out of the way.
Yes. Now that the audience knows who we are, we can begin.
Do I start?
You know, I'm not sure. We don't really talk to each other in this play.
Do you at least know what we're supposed to talk about?
I assume John.
That seems like a good assumption. I assume I'm also supposed to apologize at some point.
Yes, that's probably expected.
I don't really want to apologize, though.
That's okay. I don't really want to talk about John.
Oh, good. Because I would if you wanted me to, but I just don't know if I have it in me. I'm just kind of...
Sick of him?
Exactly.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Why did you dance?
In the woods?
Were there other times not in the woods?
Oh, yeah. I dance all the time. It's really fun.
But it's not allowed.
But why not?
Because of God.
I don't know. I think God would like it. They say he wouldn't, but part of what I learned from all this is that all these men in charge, they just make stuff up. They'll just make up whatever suits them, whenever it suits them.
They say it's because they know best.
Well, if they say it, it must be true.
They were scared of you. You made them scared.
Oh, yeah. Being scary was even more fun than dancing. They actually paid attention when I was scary.
But you were lying, weren't you?
I told the truth about John Proctor. He didn't like that very much. No one listened when I told the truth.
I don't know if I've ever been scary. I don't know if I know how. Maybe things would be different if I did.
Yeah, but it shouldn't take being scary to make things different, you know? They shouldn't have to be scared into listening to us. Things should just be different. They should just listen.
One day, maybe, the new world we were promised will be actually new. One day, maybe. The men in charge won't be in charge anymore. One day we can dance in the forest and in the streets and with each other. in our rooms that belong to us and only us. On our beds we share with no one, under the moon, under the sun, under the shade of our favorite trees, under a shower of the blood and brittle bones of supposedly strong men who failed us. And when that day comes, it won't matter that we're not supposed to dance. It won't matter that once upon a time I married a man who made me feel smaller than nothing. And like his shame was my shortcoming. It won't matter that when you were 16 and newly orphaned, a married man 2 decades older than you made promises he had no intentions to keep and said things in the dark that made you feel like you were made of fire. It will matter that you took that fire and burned him down with it, because that same fire will spread. It will scorch the earth to make room for the new world we deserve. It won't matter that he told you and told me that it was all our fault. Each of us, both of us. It won't matter that we let him think he had reclaimed his goodness in the face of death. It won't matter, because that kind of currency has been out of date for centuries in our new world. Those feelings will be so far away from us by then. At first, we won't remember their names, and that will plague us. Then the faces of those will become blurry, and we'll feel the stirrings of peace. And then we won't remember those feelings at all. We wouldn't even recognize them if they passed us on the street. We'll sleep soundly then. We'll use our fire only for warmth.
Shelby presses play on the music, and they dance. Fantastic. Fantastic. Am I back? Oh, I'm back. All right. All right. Fantastic work. I just want to give a hand for the actors who rehearsed this about, I don't know, half an hour ago for 5 minutes and killed it. Okay. At last, we get to Kimberly and Eleanor. Unmute yourselves. Unmute, unmute.
Yay.
Yay. Fantastic. Okay. So the big question. Why'd you decide to take on Miller?
Oh, my story's like long and involved and weird and specific and boring. I don't know. I don't know if I decided to take on. I guess I did. It was very consciously. I wanted to deal with the canon. I saw a play that was quite popular that was unpacking a play from the canon and not unpacking it in a way that I thought was what deserved to be unpacked. It was not asking some of the questions, especially about, my life and about gender, that I thought were central to the original play. And I was frustrated, and I went out with a friend who I saw the play with and got a little drunk and was complaining and sort of said, I'm just going to make a play that's like Death of a Salesman 2, Willy moments suck. And then we were both like, that's a genius idea. And then sobered up and wondered if there was anything to it and reread the original. And of course, as we know, the original is deeply problematic and deeply brilliant. It's so good. And then it turned out that if one wanted to try to do that, to unpack that, it would be the most enormous task. And I had unfortunately fallen in love with the idea of doing that task. And it's been like a millstone around my neck to attempt to engage with this very, very brilliant, very, very frustrating play. So that's the shortest possible version.
That's amazing. And okay, great. And and then Kimberly, what about you? That's fantastic. Yeah, so you basically were you saw a play, Eleanor, that you're they didn't do that very well, and they didn't pay attention to gender. So I'm going to do it.
Yeah. And
I love that. That's really great. So great. Okay, Kimberly, how about you?
That's an amazing story. I kind of always made sense of the world and my place in it through other other works. The first things I wrote for fun in high school was fan fiction. And so a lot of my plays are kind of responding to other books and other plays and other pop culture. And that's just kind of the way my brain works. And the summer after I finished grad school, I read this incredible feminist historian, Stacy Schiff. She wrote this book called The Witches, Salem, 1692. And it was talking a lot about the various traumas and realities that were faced by the teenage girls in Salem at the time. And it just totally blew my brain open. And then that fall is when the Harvey Weinstein allegations broke and when like the tidal wave of Me Too started. And I was just like completely consumed by it. And I think the first of the millions of times that men have called that moment in time a witch hunt, I started kind of making connections to that feminist historian in that book I read this summer. And then obviously the most famous play and work of art in general about the Salem witch trials is The Crucible. And I went back and reread it, and similar to Eleanor, was struck by like, first of all, how much of a genius Arthur Miller is. I think like structurally, just like on a craft level, he's always been the gold standard, and you can see why when you revisit it, but you can also see all the holes, and not holes so much in like the writing, but more of like holes in the way it's been taught and the way it's been handed down. And then thinking about Me Too and the cycles that lead to moments in time like that. And I think part of it is because we teach these same things over and over again and never stop to interrogate them and never stop to look at the other voices on the periphery. And Arthur Miller's writing about John Proctor as his stand-in, and what about all the other writers who don't get to have their stand-ins as part of the conversation? And yeah, so anyway, again, I could go on and on and on, but a short version of that answer.
That's so great. And what holes, I mean, I assume you're speaking specifically about the kind of blind spot of John Proctor being like the hero of that play, having had an affair with a 16-year-old girl, right?
Yeah, a 16-year-old girl who's literally had witnessed her parents get murdered like very soon before the play started. She references that. She's like, I saw people smash my parents' heads into the pillow, like next to mine. This is a girl who's suffered immense trauma. She's 16. She's an employee of his. And the whole play just paints him as like the most morally sound man. When he like yells at his wife, sorry, I'm just like now like recounting my own play.
Do it.
But yeah, like, I mean, there's a scene in the play where he tells his wife, I should have struck you down when you asked me to confess. So he's basically like mad at his own wife for getting him to confess to the affair he had with a teenage girl. And his wife is pregnant. Like, there's just all this stuff, and it's never examined within the play. Or, you know, like this was one of the few plays I read in high school as part of like as high school literature. And obviously it wasn't unpacked in any meaningful way then, but yeah, so within the play and in how the play's taught, I think.
So great. So great. Thank you. So you got mad.
Yeah.
You know, and Eleanor got mad. I mean, that's interesting. You both got mad at something that you saw. And Eleanor, you know, we had a kind of really great conversation in our first talk about why kind of interrogate Miller, like, you know, and you both talked about how you actually love Miller. Can we enter into that conversation a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, what's so frustrating about Miller is that he's one of the greatest humanists of the 20th century. I mean, the depth of feeling that he has for people and for ordinary people and for the pain of being an ordinary person is extraordinary. It's really incredible. And American theater has a big problem with being very elitist, and not just American theater, like global theater, you know, and the degree to which the ordinary indignities of life he actually notices, and he actually wants to talk about them, and he wants to talk about things like capitalism that theater is afraid to talk about, and he wants to talk about things like mortality, and he does, and it's so moving. And then just some humanity matters and some doesn't, and to some degree that's like totally fair. Like, he, you know, wrote about white Americans and not Black Americans. If we're not going to talk about the gender thing for one second, you know, and August Wilson wrote about Black Americans, not about white Americans. To some degree, there's like, well, write what you know and like tell your own story. But then when it gets canonized, it's like what Kimberly was saying. It's not him, it's how we teach him, it's where we put him. It's when that is the play. That is the play, and that's what a play does. And for me, with Death of a Salesman, there's that phrase, attention must be paid, right? It's the most famous Miller quotation, attention must be paid. To whom? To whom must attention? And Miller's answer is to Willy. Miller's answer is attention must be paid to the horrible pain of being a 65-year-old man. And that he's right. That's horrible. It's painful. It's painful to get older. It's painful to be caught in the wheels of capitalism. But then to be utterly blind to what about the person who's literally just called woman in the script because you didn't give her a name, and the only thing distinguishing her is the maniacal cackle. No attention must be paid to her. So it's really baffling and frustrating, and there's this deep love-hate. To some degree, I aspire to have as much humanism as he does. And to some degree, I aspire to have a lot more, because I aspire to not forget that there's a lot of other stories that I'm not telling at any given moment. I don't know. I think I got way beyond the question. Sorry.
No, it's really great. That question of attention must be paid. And just before we go on, I forgot to let all the viewers know that we will have time for questions in the latter part of this hour. So if you have questions, feel free to, what do they do? Ken Matt, our producer, put them in the chat. There's some place for them. Ask them someplace. I'm sure on the YouTube or Facebook Live, there's a place to ask questions, but we'd love to have your questions. It's beautiful, this question of attention must be paid. And it's interesting because, Kimberly, in the Crucible, there is a Black character, Tituba, and there is mention of indigenous peoples who are mainly kind of murderers who murder people's parents, so this is the 1600s, right? So, and of course, Tituba is a slave character. Where was I going? Oh, yes, love for Miller, but need to interrogate and shake it. I think one of the things we talked about is, I have a dear colleague, Dexter Bullard, who talks about when he's teaching acting, that thing where actors, when they're in a scene where they get really mad at each other, and then somebody walks out, walks away, and, like that, right? And Dexter always says, why would you walk away from drama? And also you don't fight unless you love it. You don't fight unless you love somebody or you love something. Because if you didn't love it, you walk away. Right. But you actually go in hard when you love it.
Right.
Kimberly, you want to jump on that?
Yeah, no, we were talking about that the other day, of just, I've had people say, oh, so you're writing a Miller hit piece. And I'm like, why would I want to spend years of my life being in conversation with something that I didn't think was a worthwhile thing, or with a legacy I didn't think was a worthwhile legacy? That would just be kind of a waste of my time and be pretty miserable. But it's also I think in the way that I love everything that you were saying, Eleanor, and in the way that he also kind of has centered this one specific experience. I think the canonization of Miller has also kind of centered a particular one specific kind of playwriting too, of kind of this very rigid, well-made play, which he does so well. I don't write that way. And I never read plays that weren't that until I was well into my 20s. And so it's also when we're teaching the content and the stories and those things over and over again and not interrogating them, but we're also teaching the same structures and teaching young writers that those are the only ways to make plays, then that's also a way that interrogating him felt important to me, of I'm going to specifically put this very famous character in the title of my play, and then the play is going to be, there's going to be teenage girls talking about pop culture, and that's going to be powerful, and that's going to be what the play is, and it's going to touch on a lot of different things, and that's, yeah. Anyway.
And among many other luminaries like Carol Churchill and Sarah Rule and a lot of people, Paul Vogel have deconstructed the relationship between gender and Miller's structure of story and the well-made play, it's a very masculine way of telling a story, frequently. And that was something that came up for me also writing.
Yeah, it was fantastic reading both of your plays, because you also both have women acting. You know what I mean? You both have women acting. One is acting in Eleanor's play, and the characters are Heather and Violet, right? Or the actresses acting in Eleanor's play. So you pull a kind of meta,
Yeah, I'm in her play.
And then, you're in your play, and Jim's in your play, and then in Kimberly's play that they act in the Crucible, and they're reading the Crucible. So there's this kind of layering that you're doing, which is already kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? Interrogating or exploding the straight up kind of realistic structure, which is great. And what led you to that? What led you to like women acting?
For me, it was actually a very long journey. When I first had my angry cocktails, my cocktails of rage, and decided to write a play called Life of a Salesman, I was originally going to write just a naturalistic, like, we're in 1949 and Linda, not Linda, is going to have a chance to talk to the woman. And we're going to see everything that they would have said. And that was the first draft of the play. And that was the second draft of the play. And I think that was the third draft of the play. That was like what it was. And something was missing. And I should mention this play is a commission. I'm so grateful. It's a co-commission from Milwaukee Rep and Writers Theater.
Oh, great.
And they provided a lot of support to develop it and to interrogate it. And through those workshops and that support, I learned that there was a lot that, like, it was artificial. It wasn't a fit for, a lot of what drew me to the story. My grandmothers were alive around the time of Linda Lohman. One of them was the wife of a salesman in Brooklyn. And both my grandmothers died and without really ever telling their stories, without ever really opening up about their stories. And neither of them had something that necessarily makes a good story, much like Willy Lohman. Like, there wasn't the big dramatic, thing. And that question of like, and for me, I had a baby while I was working on the play. I wrote the first draft, I got pregnant, was workshopping it while I was pregnant, workshopped it while I had a newborn, been workshopping since, and that question of the shape of a female life and the shape of an American play and whether they fit together, and the opportunity to kind of explode that a bit. That's not really about the acting piece, but the sort of stopping and the women's ordinary lives, two actresses, like, they're not having the most extraordinary day of their lives. They're like a mom, a woman who's thinking of getting pregnant, and they're just having a day. And that attention being paid to that, I suddenly realized was incredibly important to me.
Yeah, because the wife and the mistress, the archetypic figures on the stage that are kind of Barbara Stanwyck.
They're there to confront each other. And also the whole conversation about Willy, like, it's about like, oh, I want him. No, I want him. And like, they couldn't stop talking about him. And to some degree, that's true, because that is the conversation they would have.
Right.
But then to stop that and to sort of say, like, what are you thinking about? Like, oh man, I hate my pantyhose. Like, and like, they remind me of my mother. And like, just the things that would actually come out of two women talking. And to say, like, listen to this for a little while, like, and to bring it into our own era, because it's really easy also to look at 1949 and be like, that was bad. In the them times, the bad things happened. And to sort of bring it into our era and be like, well, where are we? Like, a lot has changed.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful for that. And I'm sitting here as like a working mom, but also what hasn't changed and what's different and what might be different forever, because like, people make different choices, and what is only different because we force it, and having a chance to carry it into the present day and ask those questions also.
Right. And that great speech that I was in love with about like, but what about just the ordinary Jane? She's not sexy. She's not beautiful. She's not an extraordinary athlete. She's not, she's like just a regular person.
Not like Elizabeth Warren and Beyonce.
And does anybody care about just a regular woman? Like we came to care about a regular man with Willy Lohman. Like we came to care about a regular old guy. And so, is there any room for like just, a story? And I think that's what you're doing. You're like making space to take care about like.
You're all going to listen for 20 minutes to two ordinary women.
Yeah, exactly. Kimberly, I want to get back to you. So they're acting in your play. Now they're acting the Crucible. I get it. But there's a strong performative moment at the end. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. So it's an English class. And so I knew I wanted to have those moments where we read choice Crucible excerpts out loud, and the Miller estate was very generous to let me do that. Yeah.
Sweet. I didn't get that.
How'd you work that out?
It was a shock, but anyway, so Yeah, so they're in English class, and I knew I wanted to, because obviously there are parallels with what is happening in the lives of these teenagers and what is happening in the Crucible, and and I knew I kind of wanted to see those words in their bodies and kind of how that like changes them. And but then it kind of intersects with, there are these recurring bits of pop culture and throughout the play. It's like deeply important to how these girls like me make sense of the world. And so then I knew I wanted to end with a moment of dance that ends up being to Lord's Green Light. And it's this whole like wild sequence that gets like super theatrical in a way that the play really hasn't been. So I think seeing those two teenage girls play Elizabeth and Abigail, and then like that's a moment of healing for them. Those two characters have been through this whole journey throughout the whole play and are best friends, but have been kind of estranged and all these things. And then kind of seeing them heal each other through like reclaiming that text, and kind of like what Eleanor is speaking to, of kind of being like, well, Arthur Miller clearly didn't care to like write about someone like me, but like I'm finding my way in, and I'm like taking up this space, and then like taking up more space by dancing. I think like the whole journey of my play is like to watch young women learn how to take up space, and being able to do that both because of and in spite of the play. And so seeing them perform it.
So it's also attention must be paid. I mean, I think you just said that, but it's like we're gonna pay attention to these just teenage girls, down here in Georgia, who and then of course the many Mr. Smiths of the world, the many Mr. Smiths. But I love that it's like that story is there, and it's strong, but it's not where we're focusing. We're focusing really on the girls. I mean, it's there and she says something, but it's not like the big reveal of the play and then everything hinges on the moment where she says, yeah, we had when you used to touch me, you know what I mean? It's actually so much more focused on the girls, which I really appreciated, that it's not, you decenter him, and you even decenter what he did and focus instead on how it affects how they think about it, how their friendships, et cetera. It's really beautiful.
Yeah, it's funny. My playwriting, I teach playwriting in a lit class that actually focuses a lot on women playwrights and kind of new forms. But my playwriting class read the play this week, and one of them asked, is it intentional that not a whole lot happens, and that we're just kind of like watching how things that already happened affect these girls? And I was like, yeah, that was super intentional. And it is kind of about like seeing how then like they deal with it and learn how to like move through it. So,
it is really actually great to be, because I have a 16-year-old daughter, and it's a great time to be, well, it's not in a pandemic, and this is not a great time, but in terms of theater, because of plays like this play and The Wolves and Our Dear Dead Drug Lord, where there's attention is being paid to 16-year-old, to young girls. I can't wait. And what I love about what Eleanor is up to is, and also I'd love to see some attention paid to just regular or, ordinary, 30-something, 40-something, 50-something women.
Moms. Finally paying attention to moms.
Oh God, and you just had one. We'll talk to you later. But listen, just it's interesting. Just canonical texts are strong. As a director, like when I've had the chance to work with them, they're strong. You can really push up against them, right? They and so they wouldn't be in the canon if they weren't really strong and people couldn't push up against them. But folks can get pretty protective of them. Shakespeareans can get pretty protective of the Shakespeare plays. And Millerites can get pretty protective. It's interesting how people get very protective of these very strong plays that don't seem to have any trouble being produced. But have you faced obstacles to or criticism for taking on these seminal plays? And if so, in what ways?
I personally haven't yet. I mean, this is a very new play. This sneak peek is like one of the, unless one lives in Houston and was at one public reading, this is like the first public anything for it. So I haven't had to deal with a lot of that. But I think from the excerpt people heard, I threw in a lot of like, here's all the things I'm anticipating that I don't even care. Like, go for it. Like I don't have a PhD in Miller, and you understand more about Miller than me, or Miller wouldn't have women of color in the plays, or, oh, I wish you were actually engaging with Willy Loman. Like, I'm just like, okay, like I get it.
You kind of like fend it off in advance, don't you? You're like, I'm just going to say all the things,
like,
so that when you decide you want to say the thing, I already said it for you.
Like, and it's like fine, yeah. And so then you can kind of like prophylactically be like, if you're bringing that up, you kind of didn't get my play, which is fine. Like, you know,
Funny. Funny. What
but,
about you, Kimberly? Have you run into any protectiveness of John Proctor?
Well, mine hasn't had a professional production. It was supposed to this year, but then COVID. But it's had a few college productions and a few readings and things. And it's not so much been pushback against, like, from the Miller side, at least. It's been like this interesting response where, like, some kind of people have been like, oh my God, you're so brave. And I'm like, am I? I don't think so, actually. Maybe in other ways, but not really with what I'm doing in this play. So I think, like, that is kind of the interesting thing, like, of what we've been talking about this whole time about, like, attention must be paid to these people who attention doesn't get paid to, and, like, that's somehow an act of bravery. Like, that's been an interesting pattern to note. And then also, like, I think the main form of pushback has been about just, you know, in my play Teenage Girls Talk, the way teenage girls talk, and they use lots of filler language, and there's lots of, and I've had a couple of talkbacks where they're like, well, I really wish that, like, in some of the scenes where, like, analyzing the Crucible, that, like, the girls express themselves a little bit more intelligently or something like. And I'm like, oh, I think we have different definitions of what intelligence looks and sounds like, but okay. But yeah, so not as much from the Miller side, but more kind of from, like, oh my God, like, oh, you're so brave for talking about young women in rural Georgia. Like, I was a young woman in rural Georgia. So that's great.
That's great. That's great. I just want to point out for those of you watching, and we're going to get to questions from the listening audience in a second, that you guys just saw excerpts from plays that have not been produced. You got a sneak peek at these two brilliant plays. And so hopefully when they do get produced, you'll be the first people out there buying a ticket, because they're coming to you soon at a theater near you whenever we open up from the pandemic. And so I think we have some time to take some questions if the producers want to throw them onto the screen. There we go. Okay. I'm just going to make my screen a little bit bigger here so I can see what's happening. I'm an old lady. Okay, so this is from G. Giris. What are some other new plays that you think reflect and lionize the 21st century woman the way Death of a Salesman did with Willy Loman? Are there any plays that kind of take on the 21st century woman like we have with Willy Loman?
It's also interesting the choice of the word lionize. I mean, one of the things that I love about Death of a Salesman that I think Miller deserves so many props for is that, like, he's very aware of Willy Loman's flaws. And the idea is, like, attention has to be paid beyond their flaws. And I kind of think that this is more cinema than theater, that, like, cinema, we are paying attention to women, but it's like Wonder Woman. Like, if you're literally perfect, you can have attention paid to you. You know, I mentioned some playwrights who I think are huge influences. You know, I think Carol Churchill has just, like, not given a shit who you want to pay attention to for decades, and pays attention to whoever she wants, including women. You know, Escaped Alone had older women. You listen to them for the whole play, and it's lovely. Paula Vogel, I mentioned Sarah Rule, I think that Lynn Nottage has done some incredible work in that regard. Dominique Moreau, Chiara Lecre-Jerez, like, there's so many brilliant women writing theater, and I like Kristen Green. I'm the tip of the iceberg. There's, like, I think that actually we're, like, in a beautiful renaissance of, you know, and Kimberly mentioned, like, our Dear Drug Lord and Wolves, and, like, I think that, like, actually we are seeing these stories, and the canon is exploding, and that's thrilling. And I'm still curious about, like, like Kimberly, I got those plays late. I got them in, like, my mid-20s.
Yeah.
And
I think about
yeah.
I think about actually In the Blood by Susan Lloyd Parks, you know, because that character, Hester La Negrita, like Willy Loman, is deeply flawed. And, you know, I mean, far worse off than Willy Loman, right? I mean, it's like Wojciech meets Mother Courage meets The Scarlet Letter, of course, you know, but I think of that play. And Kimberly, did you want to riff on that question? What other playwrights or what?
I mean, I think Eleanor already, I'm also a disciple of Carol Churchill. But I'm glad you brought up Lynn Nottage, because I was thinking about, I think Intimate Apparel, you know, is like around the same time period as Death of a Salesman, and follows this one woman, Esther, who's a Black woman in 1950s New York, and a very, very different story and a very different life. So yeah, I think she does the like well-made play thing, but like through a completely different lens and in a completely different way. And yeah, so that's like the first thing to be like directly in conversation with Miller that I thought of. But I mean, yeah, I could like literally just talk.
Are you talking about Susan Lloyd Parks? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I could talk about all of these women playwrights.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because prior to In the Blood, Susan Lloyd was writing like Gertrude Stein, you know, and then I think set out to write like, okay, I'm going to write a Sophoclean tragedy, and like did it, you know. Hey, there's a question that came from Hallie Palladino, who says she loves you, Kimberly, and loves all your plays. And it's not a question, it was a comment, but commenting on the ways in which at the end of John Proctor, there's a kind of hope for friendship. And the same is true at the end, and I don't want to give away everything about The Wife of a Salesman, but both the friendship between the two actresses and then the relationship that develops between wife and mistress. I want to talk about, let's talk about women and friendship and why that's interesting dramatically.
Yeah, it's so important to me. I think like we've seen over and over and over again, like when two women are on stage together, they're either fighting or they're talking about the man and the play. And I think like I've certainly fought with my women friends, but this whole like catty tearing each other down trope, like has not been my experience of female friendship. Like actually my experience is that I would be completely lost and probably dead if I didn't have the women friends that I have, you know. Like I wanted to see, and especially as a teenager, especially being the type of teenager I was and the kind of place I grew up in, like I wanted to do that on stage and to kind of see girls supporting each other and helping each other become who they're going to be, and the joy and the sacredness of that. And yeah.
What about you, Eleanor?
Yeah, I mean, I think I hate gender essentialism, and I super hate a lot of the field of evolutionary biology, but I'm going to reference them anyways. So, you know, there's the theory that everyone talks about fight or flight, and there's a theory that some people who I don't know their names have put forward that like fight or flight actually really refers to an instinctive response in male bodies, and that women often have a response of tend and defend, that the best way for women to be safe in stressful situations is to tend to their communities, tend to their relationships, and that's like actually a stress response and a threat response from women is like, let's all get on the same team. And I think that skill at connection, that's almost a survival skill, is really interesting, and that gift for connection often across major barriers is something interesting. And then I think also when you're like deconstructing what is a well-made play, like a well-made play is like there's a central conflict, like two people are fighting over the same thing and they fight for 90 minutes and then someone dies, you know. And then when you like, I think when you want to set a challenge for yourself as a writer, how can I make it tense and exciting?
Yeah.
If they're not fighting.
Yeah.
That's harder. That's really hard as a writer. And attracted to masochistically attracted to things that are very hard. It's that question of like, how can it be super tense that they're getting closer?
That's great. That's great. And really hard, right? Because the tension lives in other places. You know what I mean? Like when people, it's interesting, you know, teaching at the theater school, or just teaching anybody, you know, we're always talking about conflict and drama, that there's got to be conflict. But what conflict is not necessarily just people going at it. You know what I mean? Where the conflict lies, you know, even down to like, can I trust you, as you reference in your piece, Eleanor, when you know, like the wife going, can I maybe, or the mistress going, can I maybe trust her? like that conflict of how do we negotiate this relationship?
Can I confide in you? Will that go okay?
Is it okay to talk about like Willy's problems? It's really great. We had another question from Dan in the chat about were there other, and I know you've named some of these, but maybe beyond playwrights, other or beyond contemporary female playwrights, are there other non-Miller influences on your work?
Oh yeah, so many. I mean, with this,
I love it if we said like no. I only read Miller. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think like for every play I write, I probably read like 100 books, and that's just like I just read a lot. But then also, yeah, I think this play in particular, it is very contemporary and very aware that it's contemporary, and so it's constantly referencing musical artists like Taylor Swift and Lorde, or like huge presences in the play, and kind of how the girls identify with them, and kind of like fighting over that. And when you're fighting over that, you're actually fighting over different things. And I think, like all kinds of culture stuff, like Joan Didion makes an appearance in the play. Yeah. Not literally, she's not a character, but it's just like a constant kind of reference cycle, because again, that's the way my brain works. And I talked about the Stacy Schiff book, which was huge for me. Lindy West is also an epigraph in the play, like a lot of these really just smart women who have been responding to Me Too and to the ongoing cultural shifts that we've had as a result of it. And I mean, I could go.
Great.
That's
great. What about you, Eleanor?
I love what Kimberly's saying, but for me, I think nonfiction is frequently, that's kind of my go-to read until pandemic days. Like I like to see theater. I don't read that much theater sometimes. I see it. I did. It was fun. But I'm a huge nonfiction reader. And it shows up much more in my play, The Niceties, because my last play is all about nonfiction and history. I often I used to be a high school history teacher. I often look at myself as a history person as much as a theater person. And I think that, but I also, I really read a lot of religious studies texts. I read a lot of philosophy. I think that theater is a great place to talk about a lot of things that aren't just theater, So to some degree, like writing about Miller is the most theater focused that I've ever been, because I'm trying to write about the world, and theater just happens to be a place that I think is one of the best places for us to focus in and sit and think about the world.
Let me, on that note, I'm going to ask you, I know we're coming up on time and we may run just a little bit early. I mean, a little bit late, because I got to ask you this question. I was watching the Goodman production of Death of a Salesman this morning, which is really devastating to watch on a rainy Chicago morning on a Friday. And I was struck by how profoundly it resonates as I think about the Iron Belt and the manufacturing crises that led into the 2016 election and the result of the 2016 election. This is like a terrible question to ask a playwright. I'm married to one. I know it's a terrible question. Forgive me. But but both of your plays, to me, resonate powerfully, and not just in terms of the Me Too, but just powerfully in this time. Can you talk about how you believe your stories speak to this moment? It's a terrible question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
I mean, it's so hard to say what we'll remember about this moment in 20 years, and I know we'll remember Me Too, and I think Kimberly's play certainly seems more directly related to that than mine does. I hope, we've been talking about all these amazing women writers who are blowing open the idea of what stories matter and where we focus, and I hope that this will sort of be remembered as the time when that lever flipped, and so this will be evocative of the moment that suddenly everyone realized that maybe you had to really broaden the story of who you had to pay attention to whom you had attention must be paid. But it is interesting when you mentioned the Rust Belt. Like, to me, I do sometimes wonder whether that's flipping. Like, I'm not minimizing, like, we have a giant crisis surrounding manufacturing jobs in this country. We also have a crisis surrounding retail jobs in this country, which affects women.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So we talk about it. Like, it's not like every person on the presidential debate field has to answer the question of how are we handling childcare. Every person in the presidential debate field has to handle the question, how are we handling the disappearance of brick and mortar retail stores? Because those are women's jobs and we don't care about women's jobs. Like the New York Times stories are about the men's jobs. Like their tragedies are still the front page stories. And that's not, those are real tragedies. I feel for that. That's so important. But like, why isn't it also a tragedy that like working moms don't know where to put their kids so that their kids will be safe and nurtured and learn and grow while they go get enough of a paycheck to feed their kids? Why isn't that like an equal tragedy that's front page news every single day? So to me, I'm not sure that the lever has burst. And I would hope that it is going to turn and that we'll look back and say people were just barely starting right now to ask those questions.
God, Eleanor, I hope that there's a recording of this, because I just love what you just said. And I love the rage and the passion behind it, because it's the same rage in which we kind of take on this play. Because when we center the story of Willy Loman, and again, I love the story, but when we center and canonize that story, we create the kind of, we uphold the patriarchy. I hate to say uphold the patriarchy, but we do, that leads to 50% of white women voting against their best interests in 2016.
And we uphold a set of political, look at the tax deductions for mortgages and the tax deductions for childcare. Guess which one you get to deduct more for? Oh, mortgages by a factor of like 1,000. Like there are policy implications to our art, because Willy's quest for a home is something the government should support. And my quest to continue to have a job, even though I have a baby, is not something that the government should support. That's my own weird personal choice that I made because I'm not Willy Loman. Like there are consequences to this art. And I hope that Kimberly and I are changing where we look to think, what are we trying to support? Who are we caring about? Who are we helping? I hope that that can happen.
Yes. Amazing. The actors are in the chat going like, go off. Yes.
Yeah.
Ashley's in the chat. Kimberly, do you want to address like resonance?
I mean, I don't know if I can say anything better than that. I'm like also going to rewatch the recording of that a million times. But yeah, I mean, I think like just to build on that, and like, I think my play particularly being about young women is kind of like we've seen in the past couple of years, young people kind of recognize their own power and stand up to power. And I'm hoping that at this kind of dawning of recognizing what is possible and kind of what Eleanor's saying of like, hopefully this is just like the tip of it. And then in years we'll look back and be like, oh my God, we hadn't even gotten started yet. And then I hope, my play, and I think like plays like ours can show young women like, no, you got it, come on. And that they do and they will and they already are. But and then what the other stories that we canonize and that we centralize and involve that young women, all women.
Stephanie LeBolt, who's a director, one of my students, I'll just out her, just pointed out that women are leaving the workforce at 4 times the rate of men during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. And the government doesn't care. There's no plan. It's not an urgent problem. It's not something anyone needs to address according to the powers that be.
Right, because we're not really, I mean, they know we're in the workforce, but it's not considered like, necessary in the way that like the man needs to stay in the workforce because he's got to, raise his family. And the idea of like all the women who are the primary breadwinners of their household, all the women who are single and raising children, etc. David James says, need to go. This is a great way to spend a Friday happy hour. Yes, David James, thank you so much. It's interesting, like, when I see you, Eleanor, and I see you, Kimberly, and I ask this question about the kind of, coming up against the granddaddy of us all, a student of mine was talking about having an argument with her father recently. And it's the kind of argument at the dinner table that we're all having now because we're at home with our parents, or if you're of a certain age, you might be home with your parents, and you might not be of an age that you should be home with your parents. And nobody can get under our skin worse than in some ways, our father, in the way that I think nobody can get under our skin more than Arthur Miller, because we love him and we love his story, you know what I mean? And yet he sends us raging and crying from the table. But what I love about what Eleanor and Kimberly have done is come back at the table and say, I'm at this table and I'm going to sit at this table with you, Arthur Miller, and I'm going to actually I'm going to complicate the conversation that we're having around this dinner table. So I'm moved by the love and rage at our country, love and rage at our canon, and the tremendous love we have for young women and for women in this country and around the world. So thank you both so much for your time, your intelligence. I hope that I'm going to watch this because I'm just going to watch. I'm going to take that particular segment, Eleanor, and I'm just going to post it around. Then I'm going to take. There's another segment of yours, Kimberly. I'm going to post it around. But thank you both so much for sharing your terrific new plays. Everybody, get out there, look for these plays, get ready to buy a ticket, and your minds.
Thank you to you and to the audience and to our actors for bringing them to life. Thank you so much. I wish I could hug everyone, but I sure can't.
Yeah, and thank you, Eleanor. I love being in conversation with you and your work.
Great.
Such an awesome moment of joy.
Mm-hmm.
Eleanor and Kimberly, don't fly away when we go off air. Stay on for just a second. And everybody else, viewers, thank you so much. Again, on behalf of the Goodman Theater, this is Fridays at 5. It's been a pleasure to spend time with you with these plays. And you must see, in addition to these plays, when you go buy your ticket to see them when they're being produced, do see The Stream of Death of a Salesman. It will break your heart.
And vote. Go vote.
Oh, vote.
And do that.
Must vote. 11 more days.
Everyone you know and make them vote too.
Thank you.